So, what did you learn?
We saw this interesting documentary on this group of traditional healers called the Kawaya.
Oh, the Kayawaya?
Yeah. How do you know about them?
Well, your dad and I, we met in Bolivia.
What? In Bolivia? What were you doing in Bolivia?
Well, honey, you know, it was the 60s, and we were exploring our spirituality. But we realized that we have to stop because we were appropriating the Kayawaya culture. And we wanted to learn about how we can protect the rights of indigenous tribes. And you know, that's why I work for UNESCO now.
UNESCO? What's that?
Honey, UNESCO is an agency in charge of promoting international collaboration through education, science, and culture. And in order to further universal respect for justice, the rule of law, and human rights.
That's interesting. When's Dad coming home?
Oh, it's getting late. He should be here any minute.
Hi guys, I'm home!
Hi, Dad!
Hi, darling.
Hello.
How was work, darling, at WIPO?
Well, work was good, but I got bogged down in these Blackfoot TP transfer ceremony documents.
Whoa, that sounds complicated. What's WIPO?
WIPO is the World Intellectual Property Organization, a specialized agency of the United Nations, whose political goal is to promote through international cooperation and creation, dissemination, use, and protection of works of the human spirit for the economic, cultural, and social progress of all of mankind.
Do you want a tangerine?
Well, no. How's your day?
She was learning about the Kayawaya today.
Oh,
Yeah.
the Kaiawaya. I remember those times. So, what did you learn about the Kaiawaya today, sweetie?
The documentary said that in the Kalawaya community, there are many traditional healers who go from one place to the other and help people with their medical knowledge. But they also said that there were pharmaceutical companies that were appropriating their therapeutic knowledge for their own means. But there were also like things I didn't understand. They were talking about intellectual property and intangible heritage.
Oh, you mean intangible heritage?
I guess so.
Let me tell you. Intangible cultural heritage is a term first used by UNESCO in 2003. In the Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. It refers to the practices, representations, and expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and culture spaces associated with them that communities recognize as part of their cultural heritage. It is more linked to the idea of human rights and the fact that indigenous people have a right to intangible cultural heritage.
Is dinner ready? I'm hungry.
On the other hand, WIPO works more with the concept of intellectual property. It refers to creations of the mind, such as inventions, literary and artistic works, designs and symbols, names and images used in commerce. Intellectual property is protected by law. For example, patents, copyrights, and trademarks, which enable people to earn recognition and financial benefits from what they invent or create.
But there are also things I didn't understand. Like they were talking about international instruments. Are there like violins or pianos and stuff?
Yes they are.
No, your dad is just a joker. No, honey. International instruments can be treaties, protocols, conventions, decisions, or derivatives. Really any document that is legally binding for the countries that ratified them. For example, UNESCO and WIPO were both instituted by international treaties and other international instruments to further their goals.
But how does it help the Kalawaya?
Well, sweetie, UNESCO recognized the number and skill of traditional Kalawaya healers as intangible cultural heritage of humanity. And this protects them from illegally being expropriated of their knowledge. And therefore, it made it possible for the healers to make economic profit, gain money. Therefore, it made it possible for the healers to gain economic profit from the research that was conducted on the medical plants.
So UNESCO can help protect indigenous cultures, but what about WIPO?
Well, WIPO can also help protect native cultures. We conduct anthropological studies, fact-finding missions to learn about the way indigenous people deal with issues of cultural property. Then, we translate traditional knowledge into intellectual property language. Take, for example, the Blackfoot teepee design transfer ceremony. By identifying such similarities and identifying them as assignment of executive rights over the designs, we are able to make traditional knowledge fit into the general legal framework. This is great because it means we can turn traditional knowledge into intellectual property. Moreover, WIPO is more effective in protecting indigenous culture than UNESCO. There are many problems with UNESCO.
Problems? What kind of problems?
Well, yeah, in the case of the Kalawaya, the problems that UNESCO created only came about because UNESCO didn't quite define their protection to certain Kalawaya healers, but rather to all of them. So UNESCO depicted the Kalawaya communities as homogeneous and egalitarian. So that sort of resulted in a conflict between many of the Kalawaya healers because they all wanted to be included in the umbrella of protection and to profit from the research that was conducted. Well, you should know from the documentary about the Kalawaya that you saw that the Kalawaya healers, they use their own kind of language. So in order to make their claims on their authenticity, they develop new forms of speech to pretend to be legitimate healers. And therefore they make themselves more likely to get the money from the research. But that doesn't mean that WIPO is any better, It's not perfect either. So, Brian, tell her, what does the WIPO entail for issues?
Well, one problem is that WIPO's mandate is limited to intellectual property. Wider socio-political and economic concerns are not taken into account. WIPO looks at customary laws of indigenous people, but not at the social aspect of the exchange. Indeed, in my example, if the ceremony presents similarities with international intellectual property norms, there are also big differences. The transaction is not simply passed down a teepee design, but a whole teepee practice that incorporates people, things, and actions, and encompasses all the rules of a transaction.
So both the human rights and the intellectual property approach have issues. Are there any other way to use international instruments to help protect indigenous cultures?
Well, yeah. For example, the Convention on Biological Diversity, also called the CBD, can also protect indigenous rights. They became famous because of their introduction of benefit sharing.
Benefit sharing? What does that mean?
It refers to a commitment to give something back to the community, like money, for example. The problem with the CBD is that the US is not a member and thus does not have to follow its rules. Generally speaking, international instruments are only binding on countries that have ratified them, which means that non-members do not have to comply with international law. The problem is that very often countries with indigenous populations, like the United States, do not want to give up their sovereignty because they do not want to have to obey laws that go against their interests. The problem is that in international law, the actors are the states whose interests are rarely those of indigenous communities. The international law system is also widely based on Western culture, even if an international lawyer believed that beyond cultural differences, there's a universal notion of justice that can be extracted from different traditional practices, it is difficult to integrate indigenous culture.
But then, are international instruments really the best way to deal with issues of cultural property?
Well,
International law has its limits. It's true. But I think it's important to raise these issues to the international level. For example, they can be integrated into diplomatic negotiations or membership to an international convention defending international indigenous cultures could be demanded in exchange for something the state wants, an economic or military agreement, for example.
Whoa! I understand everything about international instruments and their role in defending indigenous cultures now. I'm gonna get an A!
Dinner's ready, let's eat!
yay!